Over 10,000 members of the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur, French resistance fighters, operated across Normandy during Allied invasion of German-occupied France. These partisans knew every road, every farm, every hedgerow in countryside they had lived in for generations. German commanders needed to move armored reinforcements 45 kilometers from reserve positions to invasion beaches, a journey that should have taken 3 hours. It took 18 hours because French resistance turned Norman countryside into battlefield, using haystacks as bunkers, farm lanes as kill zones, and intimate knowledge of terrain as tactical advantage. Estimated 10,000 partisans conducted over 250 ambush operations during first 48 hours of invasion, delaying German divisions, protecting Allied beachheads, buying time measured in hours that translated into lives saved measured in thousands. This is the story of how farmers became fighters and how haystacks delayed panzers. The hay was older than it looked. Moreau pulled armfuls of dried grass from interior of the haystack, creating hollow space large enough for man to crouch with machine gun. The stack sat in corner of his pasture field, 30 meters from main road connecting Caen to coastal villages. German military traffic used this road regularly. Supply trucks, troop transports, occasionally armored vehicles moving between garrison positions. Today would bring larger convoy. Radio broadcasts from BBC had transmitted coded messages 3 nights ago indicating Allied invasion was imminent. When invasion began this morning at dawn, German command would rush reinforcements toward beaches. This road was direct route from German armored division positions near Caen to Sword Beach, where British troops were landing. 90 minutes remained until convoy was expected. Intelligence from Resistance Network in Caen reported that German 21st Panzer Division had received orders at 0800 hours to move toward coast. Division would travel in multiple convoys spread across morning hours to reduce vulnerability to Allied air attack. First convoy would pass this location approximately 1100 hours. Louis needed machine gun position prepared, ammunition distributed, fields of fire calculated before convoy arrived. Preparation required careful work. Haystack had to appear normal from road while containing fighting position that could survive return fire. The smell of dried grass filled Louis's nose and throat. Hay harvest had occurred 3 weeks ago during late May, when weather conditions were optimal. Norman farmers stacked hay in conical shapes 4 meters tall, 2 meters wide at base, designed to shed rain while allowing air circulation that prevented internal rot. The stacks dotted fields throughout countryside, familiar agricultural feature that German occupiers had seen daily for 4 years. Stacks were so common that German soldiers no longer examined them carefully. This familiarity was tactical advantage. What seemed obviously agricultural was potentially military. Louis was 38 years old, a dairy farmer who owned 27 hectares of pasture and cropland outside village of Hérouville. He had joined resistance in autumn 1943 after German authorities requisitioned half his cattle herd for military food supplies. The requisition wasn't negotiable. German officials arrived with trucks and soldiers, selected animals, loaded them, departed. Louis received paperwork acknowledging seizure but no compensation. Loss of cattle reduced farm productivity and income. But more than economic impact, requisition represented occupation's casual disregard for French property and livelihood. Louis's decision to join resistance was motivated by accumulated resentments rather than dramatic incident. His son Pierre helped load ammunition belts into metal containers positioned behind haystack. Pierre was 16 years old, tall for his age, physically capable but inexperienced in combat. He had joined Louis in resistance activities 6 months ago, initially conducting courier work carrying messages between resistance cells, then participating in intelligence gathering by observing German troop movements and reporting patterns. Today would be Pierre's first combat action. His hands shook slightly as he handled ammunition, stacking magazines in order, checking that each round was properly seated. Louis's wife, Marie, had begged him not to bring Pierre to this operation. The conversation had occurred at dawn in their farmhouse kitchen, while Marie prepared breakfast. She argued that Pierre was too young, that one family member in resistance was enough risk, that they might both be killed, leaving her widowed and childless. Louis had responded that Allied invasion meant critical moment, requiring all available resistance members to disrupt German response. He promised to keep Pierre in protected position, away from direct combat. But Louis understood that promise might be impossible to keep. Combat was unpredictable. German return fire wouldn't distinguish between father and son, and both would be equally vulnerable if position was discovered. 8 days ago, Louis's neighbor Jean Dubois had attempted similar ambush operation from his barn overlooking different road section. Jean had positioned himself in barn loft with rifle, planning to shoot at German patrol that regularly passed his property. Jean fired 3 shots at patrol, killed 1 German soldier, wounded another. German response was immediate and overwhelming. They surrounded barn, called for Jean to surrender, then burned building when he refused. Jean died in the fire. German soldiers posted his body in village square with sign identifying him as terrorist, left body visible for 2 days as warning against resistance activity. Louis had helped retrieve Jean's body after Germans removed it from square. He recognized Jean's wedding ring, simple gold band that Jean had worn for 23 years. The ring was heat-damaged but intact. Louis had returned it to Jean's widow, along with condolences. The incident reinforced lesson that resistance fighters needed better tactics than obvious ambush positions. Barns were conspicuous structures that German soldiers understood provided good firing positions. Haystacks were ubiquitous agricultural features that didn't seem militarily significant. Better camouflage meant better survival probability. The machine gun was Bren gun, dropped by RAF during supply mission 3 weeks earlier. The weapon was British light machine gun, chambered for .303 British cartridge, fed from 30-round detachable magazines, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute. Bren gun was reliable, relatively light at 10 kilograms, and accurate enough for ambush operations at ranges under 400 meters. Louis had trained with weapon during nighttime practice sessions in isolated sections of his pasture, learning to operate feed mechanism, clear jams, estimate bullet trajectory at different ranges. Creating effective fighting position inside haystack required engineering judgment. The hollow space needed to be large enough for comfortable aim and movement, but not so large that stack's external shape appeared abnormal. Louis created cavity approximately 1 meter deep, 1.5 meters wide, positioned off-center so stack wouldn't collapse asymmetrically. He reinforced cavity walls with wooden frame, scavenged from broken farm equipment, creating structure that would support hay weight while maintaining cavity shape. Entry was through bottom rear of stack, concealed by position against hedgerow that prevented observation from road. The field position offered good tactical advantages. Road ran straight for 300 meters in both directions from ambush point, providing clear fields of fire. Hedgerows lined road on both sides, channeling traffic and limiting German ability to deploy off-road. Small bridge crossed stream 100 meters north, creating choke point where vehicles would slow. Escape routes led through orchards and additional pasture fields toward forest 2 kilometers distant. Local terrain knowledge gave Louis significant advantage. He knew every path, every hidden gate, every section of hedgerow with gaps large enough for person to pass through quickly. German 21st Panzer Division was formidable opponent. Division consisted of 16,000 troops organized into 2 Panzer Grenadier regiments, 1 tank regiment with 127 tanks, 1 artillery regiment, and support units. Division had fought on Eastern Front during 1943, been transferred to France for rehabilitation and coastal defense duties, was positioned near Caen as operational reserve for defending against Allied invasion. When invasion began, Division received orders to counterattack toward beaches, attempting to push Allied troops back into sea before beachhead could be consolidated. Hauptmann Wilhelm Meyer commanded advance convoy element moving toward coast. Meyer was 34 years old, professional officer who had commanded company-level units in Poland and Russia before being assigned to 21st Panzer Division. He understood ambush tactics from Eastern Front experience, where partisan operations had been constant threat to German supply lines. Meyer knew that road movement during combat operations required aggressive reconnaissance, careful spacing between vehicles, and immediate violent response to ambush attempts. He had ordered his troops to shoot at any potential cover that might conceal enemy fighters, abandoned vehicles, suspicious buildings, even haystacks if they appeared unusual. The choice facing Louis was whether to engage convoy or let it pass. Engaging would delay German movement toward beaches, potentially providing critical time for Allied forces to consolidate positions and bring additional troops ashore. Every hour of delay multiplied Allied numerical advantage as more ships unloaded troops and equipment. German reinforcements arriving later would face stronger defensive positions and heavier firepower. Delaying convoy was strategically valuable for Allied success. But engaging convoy meant exposing Louis and Pierre to German return fire. Panzers carried multiple machine guns and would respond to ambush with suppressive fire against suspected positions. Haystack might conceal initial position, but wouldn't survive sustained fire from armored vehicles. If Germans concentrated fire on Haystack, hay would burn or be shredded by bullets, exposing Louis and Pierre to direct fire. Their survival would depend on escaping through rear entrance before position was destroyed. Escape timing would be critical. Leave too early, and ambush would be ineffective. Leave too late, and escape route might be cut off by German infantry. Pierre was loading 4th ammunition container when he looked toward Louis and asked directly whether they would engage convoy or observe and report. Pierre's voice was steady, but his hands continued shaking. Louis recognized that Pierre understood the choice involved balancing military effectiveness against personal survival. Pierre wasn't questioning decision. He was asking for clarity about what would happen so he could prepare psychologically for combat. Louis appreciated the directness. 17 minutes remained until convoy was expected. Decision needed to be made. Allied troops on Sword Beach were 3 kilometers from shoreline, pushing inland against German defensive positions. Radio reports from BBC indicated that initial landings had succeeded despite heavy casualties. Troops were establishing beachhead positions, bringing tanks and artillery ashore, beginning advance toward operational objectives. But German defenders were contesting every advance, using prepared positions and counterattacks to slow Allied movement. If German armored reinforcements reached beaches quickly, they might prevent Allied breakout from narrow coastal strip, potentially forcing stalemate that would allow German command to reinforce defenses and counterattack more effectively. Every hour of delay for German reinforcements was hour that Allied forces could strengthen positions, expand beachhead, and prepare for inevitable counterattacks. Resistance ambushes that delayed convoys by even 30 minutes accumulated across multiple ambush sites into hours of delay that had strategic implications for invasion's success. Louis's decision to engage or avoid wouldn't determine invasion outcome by itself, but combined with dozens of similar decisions by other resistance fighters across Normandy, collective effect would be measurable. Louis made decision. He would engage convoy's lead vehicles, fire approximately 150 rounds to destroy or disable lead truck, and create traffic jam, then withdraw through prepared escape route before German infantry could deploy against position. Pierre would remain behind Haystack during engagement, protected by Stack's bulk from direct fire, ready to cover Lewis's withdrawal with rifle fire if necessary. The plan wasn't sophisticated. Fire, withdraw, escape. But simplicity was advantage in chaotic combat conditions, where complex plans rarely survived contact with enemy. The hay chaff was scratching Lewis's neck and arms. Dried grass fragments had worked their way inside his collar and sleeves, creating persistent itching that was impossible to ignore. Sweat from physical exertion of hollowing haystack made chaff stick to skin, intensifying irritation. Lewis's throat felt coated with dust. Every breath pulled more hay particles into his lungs, creating urge to cough that he had to suppress to maintain concealment. His hands showed tiny cuts from handling rough, dried grass, small blood spots visible on fingertips where grass edges had abraded skin during hours of excavation work. The smell of dried grass was overwhelming, filling his nose completely, blocking ability to smell anything else. Louis had worn long sleeves and high collar specifically to reduce hay contact, but physical reality of working inside haystack made some exposure inevitable. He forced himself to ignore irritation, focusing on positioning machine gun for optimal field of fire. Pierre's breathing was audible from 10 meters away. Stress and physical exertion from loading ammunition had increased respiratory rate. Louis could hear slight wheeze on exhale. Pierre had mild asthma that was triggered by hay dust exposure. Wheeze wasn't severe enough to prevent combat effectiveness, but indicated Pierre was experiencing respiratory irritation from environment. Louis made mental note to position Pierre in location with better air circulation after engagement began, minimizing dust exposure that might worsen breathing difficulty. The machine gun barrel was hot from test firing conducted 30 minutes earlier. Louis had fired short burst to verify weapon function and adjust aim point for 200-meter range, where he expected to engage lead vehicles. The firing had heated barrel to temperature that remained uncomfortable to touch even through gloves. Heat indicated weapon was ready and functional, but also reminded Louis that sustained firing would make barrel even hotter, potentially causing burns if weapon had to be handled quickly during withdrawal. German convoy appeared on road at 10:58 hours, 2 minutes ahead of expected time. Lead vehicle was Opel Blitz 3-ton truck carrying infantry troops, followed by second truck. Then SDKFZ 251 half-track carrying more troops and heavy weapons. Then additional trucks. Convoy spacing was approximately 50 meters between vehicles, close enough for mutual support, but spread enough to reduce vulnerability to single explosive attack. Vehicles traveled at moderate speed, appropriate for road conditions, maintaining formation discipline that indicated experienced unit leadership. Louis positioned himself inside haystack cavity, resting Bren gun barrel on wooden support frame, aligning sights on lead truck. Distance was approximately 200 meters. Lead truck would pass closest approach point in 30 seconds. Louis controlled breathing, reducing respiratory rate to improve aim stability. His hands were steady despite awareness that next moments would determine whether he and Pierre survived after noon. The engagement began when lead truck reached optimal firing position. Louis squeezed trigger, firing controlled burst of 7 rounds into truck cabin. Glass shattered. Vehicle swerved left, rolled into ditch beside road, stopped. Louis shifted aim to second truck, fired longer burst of 15 rounds into engine compartment. Steam erupted from radiator. Vehicle coasted forward, stopped in middle of road blocking traffic. Half-track commander apparently recognized ambush situation, ordered halt and deployment of infantry to locate firing position. German response was immediate and professional. Infantry dismounted from vehicles, took covered positions behind trucks and hedgerows, began scanning for ambush origin. Half-track machine gunner traversed weapon toward Lewis's position, fired burst into hedgerow area where Lewis had positioned himself. Bullets passed 3 meters right of Haystack. Gunner was shooting at suspected position, but hadn't identified exact location yet. Lewis fired third burst at half-track, aiming for machine gunner position. Several rounds hit armored shield, sparking but not penetrating. Other rounds missed high or wide. Half-track gunner adjusted aim, fired sustained burst directly at Haystack. Rounds impacted Hay, creating visible damage but not penetrating to Louis's position. Hay was surprisingly effective bullet stop. Density of dried grass compressed into thick stack absorbed rifle caliber bullets without complete penetration. But sustained fire was destroying stack integrity. Large sections of hay were being torn away by bullets, creating gaps that would soon expose fighting position. Lewis recognized he had perhaps 30 seconds before position became untenable. He fired fourth burst at German infantry, attempting to flank position through field adjacent to road. Burst caught 2 soldiers in open, wounding both. Other soldiers dropped to prone positions, began returning fire toward Haystack. Pierre fired rifle from position behind stack, shooting at German soldiers visible on road. His fire was less accurate than Lewis's machine gun fire, but contributed to volume of fire that kept Germans suppressed momentarily. Pierre's hands were no longer shaking. Action had replaced anticipation, reducing anxiety through focused activity. Lewis called withdrawal order. Pierre grabbed ammunition containers, moved toward rear escape route. Louis fired final burst to cover withdrawal, then pulled machine gun from position, followed Pierre through back entrance of Haystack. Withdrawal route led through hedgerow gap that Lewis had cut 3 days earlier, then across orchard where apple trees provided concealment from observation, then through adjoining pasture toward forest edge. German infantry pursued but moved cautiously, uncertain whether ambush had ended or whether additional positions existed. This caution provided time for Louis and Pierre to reach forest before pursuit closed distance. Once in forest, multiple paths offered escape options that German infantry couldn't effectively cover. The ambush had lasted approximately 90 seconds from first shot to withdrawal. Lewis estimated firing 180 rounds total, 6 Bren gun magazines at 30 rounds each. German convoy was stopped with lead vehicle disabled in ditch, second vehicle blocking road, and half-track unable to advance past obstacles. Infantry had dismounted, but were pinned by ambush fire and couldn't immediately clear disabled vehicles from road. Convoy would require at least 30 minutes to reorganize, extract disabled vehicles, and resume movement. That 30-minute delay was tactical success. Lewis and Pierre reached prearranged rally point in forest 2 kilometers from ambush site. Other resistance members who had conducted observation and security during operation met them there. Group briefly assessed engagement, confirmed no casualties among resistance fighters, verified German convoy was still stopped en route. Then group separated to avoid German patrols, each member returning to homes through different routes that provided alibis for afternoon activities. Louis and Pierre reached their farm at 1300 hours, entering through fields rather than roads to avoid German patrols that would be searching for ambush perpetrators. Marie met them at farmhouse door, relieved they were safe, angry that Louis had involved Pierre in combat despite her objections. Louis acknowledged her concerns, but maintained that day's action was necessary contribution to invasion success. Argument was brief. Marie recognized that events were larger than family disagreements, accepted that both Louis and Pierre would continue resistance activities until occupation ended. German 21st Panzer Division continued movement toward beaches throughout afternoon and evening of June 6th, but accumulated delays from resistance ambushes, Allied air attacks, destroyed bridges, and traffic congestion meant division didn't reach operational areas until June 7th morning, 18 hours after receiving initial movement orders. By that time, Allied forces had consolidated beachheads, brought additional troops and equipment ashore, established defensive positions that could resist counterattacks. German counteroffensive launched on June 7th encountered prepared defenses rather than disorganized landing forces, reducing German attack effectiveness significantly. Post-invasion analysis by Allied intelligence concluded that resistance operations across Normandy contributed to German tactical confusion and delayed reinforcement deployment. Specific quantification of resistance impact was difficult because multiple factors affected German response: Allied air superiority, naval gunfire support, German command indecision, communication difficulties. But consensus among intelligence analysts was that resistance ambushes delayed German armored movements by estimated 6 to 8 hours across multiple divisions, contributing materially to Allied success in establishing beachhead before German counterattacks could be fully organized. Lewis's ambush was one of dozens conducted by resistance fighters along roads leading to invasion beaches. Not all ambushes succeeded. Some resistance positions were discovered before engagement. Some encountered unexpectedly strong German response. Some had mechanical failures with weapons or explosives. But aggregate effect of multiple ambush attempts was cumulative delay that prevented German command from responding effectively to invasion during critical first 24 hours. The haystack that Lewis had converted to fighting position was burned by German patrol later that day during sweep of ambush area. Patrol identified Stack as likely firing position based on visible bullet damage and empty ammunition casings found nearby. They poured gasoline on Stack and ignited it, destroying evidence and eliminating potential future use. Lewis observed smoke from distance, recognizing that specific position was compromised, but accepting loss as acceptable cost of successful ambush. German reprisals in region were severe, but not immediate. Wehrmacht security forces conducted raids in villages near ambush sites, arresting suspected resistance members, interrogating civilians about local resistance organization. 8 men from Lewis's village were arrested during raids conducted June 8th to 10th. 3 were released after interrogation found insufficient evidence of resistance activity. 5 were held at Caen prison. 2 were eventually executed. 3 were released after Allied forces liberated Caen in July. Reprisals were terrible but not comprehensive. German security didn't have resources to arrest entire populations, focused enforcement on individuals with specific intelligence, suggesting resistance involvement. Lewis continued resistance activities throughout June and July as Allied forces gradually advanced inland from beachheads. Operations transitioned from ambush tactics to intelligence gathering about German positions, then to direct cooperation with Allied units as front lines approached local areas. Lewis's knowledge of local terrain was valuable for Allied commanders planning advances through bocage countryside, where hedgerows created natural defensive positions that German forces exploited effectively. Pierre continued participating in resistance operations despite Marie's continued objections. Pierre's experience in June 6th ambush had demonstrated he could function effectively under combat stress, making him valuable resistance member. He conducted intelligence gathering, courier work, and participated in 2 additional ambush operations during June. His youth was tactical advantage for intelligence work. German patrols were less suspicious of teenage boys than adult men, allowing Pierre to observe German positions and movements with less scrutiny. The farm survived occupation relatively intact. Allied bombing had destroyed some neighboring properties. German requisitions had depleted livestock and food supplies. Combat operations had damaged fields and buildings. But core infrastructure remained functional. After liberation, Louis resumed commercial dairy farming, rebuilt herd, repaired damage, returned to agricultural work. The farm continued operating as family business. Louis managed operations until retiring in 1970s. Pierre eventually took over management. Current generation of family continues farming same land. Louis rarely discussed resistance activities publicly after liberation. He considered his wartime actions ordinary responses to occupation circumstances, rather than heroic achievements deserving special recognition. When historians researching resistance operations in Normandy interviewed him in 1980s, Louis provided factual description of June 6th ambush, but declined to elaborate on his motivations or emotional experiences. He maintained that thousands of French civilians had made similar contributions, that his specific actions weren't particularly noteworthy, and that focusing attention on individual contributions distorted broader collective effort that characterized resistance. Pierre was more willing to discuss wartime experiences, participating in educational programs where resistance veterans spoke to students about occupation and liberation. Pierre emphasized practical rather than romanticized aspects of resistance work: fear, discomfort, uncertainty, moral complexity of decisions that involved violence and risk. He wanted younger generations to understand that resistance required ordinary people accepting extraordinary risks rather than exceptional individuals performing superhuman actions. The Norman countryside, where ambush occurred, remains agricultural region. Fields that surrounded ambush site still produce hay, orchards still grow apples, hedgerows still define property boundaries. Road where German convoy was stopped remains main route connecting Caen to coastal communities, now carrying tourist traffic visiting invasion beaches rather than military traffic. Nothing marks specific location of ambush, no plaque, no monument, no preserved evidence. The landscape has returned to agricultural purposes it served before war interrupted normal life. But D-Day Museum in nearby Arromanches maintains photographic exhibition about resistance operations during invasion. Exhibition includes map showing locations of reported ambush sites across Normandy on June 6th to 7th, estimates of German delays resulting from resistance actions, and testimonies from resistance members describing their operations. Louis's specific ambush isn't individually documented, but is represented in aggregate statistics showing how distributed resistance actions created cumulative strategic effect. Museum interpretation emphasizes that resistance operations succeeded through local knowledge rather than military sophistication. Norman farmers understood terrain intimately, which roads offered good ambush positions, which fields provided concealment for withdrawal routes, which sections of hedgerow had gaps allowing rapid movement. This knowledge compensated for resistance fighters' limited training and weapons. German forces had superior military capability, but operated in unfamiliar terrain against opponents who knew every feature of landscape. The haystack tactic exemplified how resistance adapted agricultural landscape for military purposes. Haystacks were omnipresent in Norman countryside during summer months. German forces saw hundreds of stacks daily and couldn't inspect all of them systematically. Individual stack converted to fighting position was invisible among dozens of legitimate agricultural stacks. After ambush, Germans might burn suspected stack, but couldn't eliminate haystacks generally without damaging agricultural production they relied on for food supplies. Resistance tactic exploited fundamental contradiction in occupation. Occupiers needed agricultural productivity, but that productivity created landscape features that enabled resistance operations. Hauptmann Meyer survived war, was captured by British forces in August 1944, spent 3 years in POW camp before repatriation to Germany. Post-war interviews about his June 6th convoy movement confirmed that ambush described by Louis matched Meyer's unit's experience. Meyer remembered encounter specifically because it was first combat his unit experienced during Allied invasion. His report noted that ambush caused 35-minute delay while disabled vehicles were cleared from road and security sweep was conducted to ensure no additional resistance positions existed in immediate area. Meyer acknowledged in interview that ambush was tactically sophisticated despite simple execution. Using haystack as position was effective because stacks were common and legitimate agricultural features that his troops didn't scrutinize carefully. Positioning ambush at location where disabled vehicles would block road maximized delay effectiveness. Withdrawal before German infantry could close on position demonstrated good tactical discipline. Meyer assessed that ambush was conducted by experienced fighters who understood timing and escape procedures. His testimony validated resistance tactical judgment that haystacks provided better cover than buildings. Buildings were obvious military positions that German forces understood and could effectively attack. Haystacks were ambiguous features that required deliberate investigation to evaluate as potential positions. Ambiguity created tactical advantage by delaying German recognition of threat until ambush was already underway. The Bren gun Lewis used during ambush was hidden after operation, eventually recovered by Lewis in 1950s when he cleaned out barn storage areas. He donated weapon to local historical society along with documentation about its use during D-Day operations. Weapon is displayed in small museum in Hérouville, showing local resistance artifacts. Display includes Lewis's written account of June 6th ambush, photographs of farm where ambush was prepared, and map showing convoy route and ambush position. Museum receives few visitors, primarily local residents and occasional military history researchers, but preserves record of local contribution to invasion success. Lewis died in 1992 at age 86. His obituary in regional newspaper mentioned he was farmer and resistance member who participated in operations during Allied invasion. Obituary noted he was awarded Croix de Guerre for resistance service, but rarely wore decoration, preferred to be remembered as farmer rather than fighter. His funeral included presence of several other regional resistance veterans who had conducted similar operations during invasion period. After ceremony, veterans gathered informally to discuss shared experiences, acknowledging that their wartime actions had been necessary, but were something they were relieved to have survived and grateful never to repeat. Pierre inherited farm, continued operations until his own retirement in 2010s. Current farm operations are managed by Pierre's daughter, representing fourth generation of family farming same land. Farm produces dairy products, grain, and hay. Same products farm produced before war interrupted normal agricultural cycles. War is distant historical event for current generation managing farm, known through family stories and history books rather than lived experience. But physical landscape retains traces of wartime events. Sections of hedgerow where Lewis cut escape routes still show growth patterns affected by cuts made 70 years earlier. Apple orchard, where withdrawal route crossed, still contains trees that were young when Lewis and Pierre ran through during escape. Field where haystack stood still produces hay each summer, stacked in traditional conical shapes that look identical to stack Lewis converted to fighting position. These landscape features connect present agricultural activities to wartime tactical operations, demonstrating continuity between violence and peace, between military and agricultural uses of same land. The broader historical significance of resistance ambushes during D-Day invasion lies not in individual operations, but in aggregate effect across hundreds of actions conducted simultaneously by thousands of resistance members. No single ambush was decisive. No single 30-minute delay changed invasion outcome. But cumulative delays prevented German command from responding effectively to invasion during critical first day, when Allied position was most vulnerable. Those delays contributed to invasion success that eventually led to liberation of France and Allied victory in Western Europe. Lewis's contribution was participating in one of hundreds of ambush operations that collectively delayed German response. His tactical judgment in using haystack rather than building as fighting position was smart but not unique. Other resistance fighters made similar assessments about using agricultural landscape features for military purposes. His decision to engage convoy despite risk to himself and son demonstrated courage, but also reflected broader pattern where resistance members accepted personal danger to contribute to liberation effort. What distinguished Lewis's story from general historical narrative was specific human details. Father bringing teenage son to combat operation despite wife's objections, neighbor's death informing tactical decisions, hands shaking from stress, hay chaff irritating skin during position preparation, specific sequence of decisions leading to successful ambush and safe withdrawal. These details documented how general historical events were experienced by specific individuals who made moment-by-moment decisions that accumulated into historical outcomes. The haystack that concealed machine gun position, that absorbed German bullets without complete penetration, that was eventually burned by German patrol, represented intersection of agricultural landscape and military tactics. Simple agricultural structure became temporary military asset, served purpose effectively, was destroyed, and was replaced by identical structures serving original agricultural purpose. Physical landscape returned to peace, while historical record preserved memory of temporary military use. Lewis's machine gun fired approximately 180 rounds during 90-second engagement. Those bullets delayed German convoy 35 minutes. That delay contributed to 18-hour aggregate delay affecting German 21st Panzer Division's deployment. That deployment delay contributed to Allied success, establishing beachhead. That beachhead success contributed to eventual liberation of France. Chain of causation from individual bullets to strategic outcome was long and indirect, but real. Small actions aggregated into large consequences. Local decisions influenced distant outcomes. Farmers became fighters whose fighting enabled return to farming. Simple haystack, sophisticated purpose, hidden position, visible landscape, temporary weapon, permanent farm. Violence enabling peace. Individuals creating history. Normandy fields where invasion succeeded began with haystacks concealing resistance fighters who delayed panzers long enough for liberating armies to come ashore. Succeeded began with haystacks concealing resistance fighters who delayed panzers long enough for liberating armies to come ashore.